Inflation number came out, consumer price index, last hour, and it came in right at the expectations of 3.4% for the month of April. But still, that's 37 straight months of inflation over 3%. Aaron Hedlund's with the Show Me Institute. Aaron, what do you take out of that reading this morning?
Well, more bad news, but not really surprising news. I mean, really all this is telling us is that we have not yet gotten back down to 2%, and therefore all of this talk about the Fed cutting rates is dramatically premature. I've been saying this for a while, and now even Jerome Powell's admitting it.
Well, he is. So what now? I mean, what does the Fed do? Jerome Powell said this. I'll get your response.
Is to believe at this time that policy is restrictive and that it looks like it will take longer for us to become confident that inflation is coming down to 2% over time.
How do you read that, Aaron Hedlund?
Well, I think he's sort of put himself in a corner that he's trying to walk back just a little bit. So back in December when he came out and said that rate cuts were around the corner, he shouldn't have said that. He's not going to overtly call that a mistake, but he'll just sort of say, inflation's coming down more slowly than they thought. So I think really what the Fed is going to do right now is they're going to keep rates where they are for longer and hope that's good enough. And that will do something because Fed signaling and messaging itself has an impact on inflation. But I think if we go another 3-4 months of high readings like this, then the whole talk of rate hikes might have to start entering the conversation.
Really? So you think that not only are we not looking at any rate cuts this year when the market's expected several of those, you think rate hikes are on the table on what kind of a timeline?
I wouldn't put that imminently, but I think if we get into kind of late summer and we don't see monthly readings come down pretty noticeably, then that becomes a real serious topic of conversation. In the meantime, I think the chance of a rate cut, maybe we get one at the end of the year if all the stars align. But otherwise, I wouldn't hope for anything better than that.
Do you think at this point everything's off the table until after the election? Because either way, if Powell does a cut or a hike in the fall, it's going to be viewed as political.
They're in a really tricky position because the Fed is adamant about their political independence, and therefore they would never say they would time things based on an election. And if you look at historical periods, I mean, there have been times where they've raised or cut rates in the election year. But, yeah, it's really fraught right now. I think that the bar for them cutting the rates is just really high. I mean, the numbers would have to come down really rapidly for them to be able to justify that and not look political.
Well, something tells me that, you're going to have, I think, some pressure from some in and around the administration right now to cut those rates or at least have some kind of a cut this fall so then they can use it and insinuate, hey, look at this. We got a rate cut. Things are trending in the right direction. Do you think that's impossible?
Well, I'm sure the administration would like that. Absolutely. I don't think any sort of pressure campaign is going to work, though, because, again, there are different people on the board and who have different leanings and were even appointed by different presidents. So I don't think that political pressure campaign will work. And, in fact, the Fed has learned based on decades of experience, some good and some bad, that if it looks like they're losing independence, things unravel pretty quickly. So I think the inflation numbers are going to have to come way down before they actually feel comfortable doing that rate cut trigger before an election.
Okay. All right. Aaron Hedlund with the Show Me Institute is here on KCMO. So what else are you taking out of today and what it could mean over the long haul here when it comes to the U.S. economy at large?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's nothing to celebrate here. I mean, the inflation numbers are nearly double the 2% level. And when you look at pay adjusted for inflation, it's going down again. At least in 2023, you had some increase in pay after inflation. It was kind of starting to gain a little bit of ground. It's still very much behind where it was back in 2019, but we were seeing some progress, and now it's reversing. And really what this comes down to is we should not be relying entirely on the Fed for inflation. That's the sad thing here. So the Fed's going to do what the Fed's going to do. What we really need, though, is the rest of the federal government to move in a more pro-growth direction, and we're not seeing that kind of thing at all. All we hear is stimulus, 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 including, for example, this recent news about Freddie Mac maybe purchasing home equity loans just to inject more money into the economy.
I didn't see that. So explain that.
Well, so whether you're talking about the government sending out checks or unemployment insurance or student loan forgiveness, those are all just kind of the government trying to spray money into the economy. And then more recently, so Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are these kind of two big quasi-government entities that buy up mortgages that banks lend out, and that kind of injects money into the mortgage market. Traditionally, it's just for mortgages that you are taking out to buy a house or to refinance, but now they're going to try to do it for home equity loans, which has nothing to do with home ownership. It's purely just to make it so that people can more easily take money out of their house and go spend it on stuff. So it's more of it's a stimulus mentality, which is inflationary and not growth creating.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. All right, I want to play this other Powell clip because you brought it up, the bigger picture fiscal issues this country faces and how the insane spending is not helping inflation. You're right. Jerome Powell can only play with the rates. He can't fix bad monetary policy. Powell alluded to it yesterday. I'll play this clip and get your reaction.
I don't think it's not that it makes my life more difficult or the Fed's work more difficult, but I think it's utterly non-controversial to say that U.S. fiscal policy is on an unsustainable path. Not that our fiscal position itself is unsustainable, but the path is unsustainable, meaning that we have full employment and we're running big structural deficits, and it's we're going to have to deal with this sooner or later, and sooner is a lot more attractive than later. I do hear from elected people on both sides of Capitol Hill and in both political parties that they do understand this. And I think you mentioned the Congressional Budget Office. I think everyone should be reading the things that they're publishing about the U.S. budget deficit and the path, and should be very concerned that this is something that elected people need to get their arms around sooner rather than later.
Aaron Hedlund, that's the most forceful I've heard Powell on the broader monetary policy issues this country faces. What do you make of that?
Yeah, better late than never. I think that over the past several years, the Fed has misinterpreted political independence as saying the Fed needs to be politically neutered and not talk about fiscal policy at all. And I actually don't think that's appropriate. I think if you look historically, we've had many strong Fed chairs who've come out and kind of spoken the truth about matters. And obviously they'll leave Congress and the White House to come up with the actual policy solutions. But the reality is, we are on an unsustainable path. It cannot continue like this is. And so I'm glad to hear him speaking about it. And I just hope the rest of our leaders can step up and come up with some solutions.
Yeah, that would be nice. That would be nice because if not, Republicans, they like to yell about the deficit when Democrats are in office, but they didn't do a great job during Trump's years on that issue. And then Democrats have never met something they haven't wanted to spend money on. So, it's a terrible situation, and both parties in part are to blame.
Yeah, we're at World War II levels of debt. We're not even fighting a world war. And certainly if any sort of major geopolitical disaster were to happen, it's kind of scary to think of where things would go. So we really need to get the fiscal house in order.
Yeah, well said. Aaron, thank you for the reaction this morning, my friend. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks for having me on.
All right. That is Aaron Hedlund with the Show Me Institute. Good to have him on KCMO 95.7 FM.